The powder works, this powder works, was composed of 6 main buildings. Each building had its own head race that came off the main canal over there. Here is the head race to this mill in here. This is a big platform, grinding platform. They had water wheel and they had arrangements so that a big object would come down and strike. The head of the object was covered with copper, and they would crush the charcoal on this platform. Whether this was also the mixing mill or not, I do not know. The mixing mill was a very, very dangerous place where they crushed and mixed the 3 ingredients together. The ingredients, of course, didn't all come from Barre. As I said before, the saltpeter and the sulfur had to be imported. Now we're talking about importing materials in a large quantity early in the 19th century. How did it get here? Well, certainly from Worcester by wagon. We had no railroads. Probably a good part of it came up the Blackstone Canal for a few years, and then eventually on the Boston and Worcester Railroad, and then by wagon to here. So there had to be a steady stream of wagons back and forth, and probably there's another source of employment for a great number of people. Driving the wagons back and forth, bringing the material. There was also a lot of employment for the people that would drive the wagons loaded with the powder out of here. And we do know about one person that drove a wagon with powder kegs, and that was Newton Monroe, because family records tell us that he drove a wagon from here to Thompson, Connecticut twice a week. So quite a long haul. Mostly he was driving empty powder kegs though from the powder keg factory over in East Barre. In the mixing mill, it was important that a certain amount of water be introduced to the mixture. Not too much, not too little. Either one could be disastrous. Too much, it would ruin the mix. Too little, there is always a possibility of an explosion. Besides the mixing mill, we had a place that would, they put the material through a sieve. It was a sifting mill, and the different size powder corns were determined at that point. They also had a mill in which the water wheel operated bellows. There was a drying area where they dried. The sifting mill, by the way, was particularly dangerous. The air was always filled with dust, and people that worked there were susceptible to lung disease, as well as the constant chance that a spark would set off the whole thing. And that did happen. It happened, oh, let's say, not regularly, but too frequently. People would be very severely burned and die from the burns, or times would be killed outright by the explosions. Among those that were killed outright was young Timothy Nurse, whose mother was a Bixby. Well, any number of people. A number of them are buried in a little cemetery just across the river on Nichols Road. Merrill Holland worked here, who lived on James Street. He was some kind of a boss here. We know that because of a newspaper account in which he was the first one who arrived at the scene of an explosion. The plan, of course, was the big canal and separate head race was supposed to separate the processes so that if this mill blew up, it would not affect the next one. It would be too far away. It's some rods away. Unfortunately, there were instances where the explosion was so powerful it did set off a neighboring building, even though it was quite a few rods away. One of the reasons for that was, in order to dispel the force of the explosion, they would hang the boards rather than nailing them on. So if they had an explosion, it would blow all the boards off the side of the building, and they could take and re-hang them again. Oftentimes they would leave the side towards the river open so that they could tap the water to fight any fire. Well, this is one of the reasons why that road that you see the cars on right there is such a recent road. Every time that they put in to have a road accepted or built from that corner up toward and join where the shopping center is now, it was turned down by the town because of the proximity of the powder mill. They didn't want to have to, they didn't want people riding their wagons along that banking. Possibility of being injured by the explosion. And that brings us to the fact that the powder mill was not a popular industry in town. Nowadays we have people fighting against having 10,000 loads of trash come in a day. Well, in those days we had people fighting against the powder mill. And in newspaper articles and in letters to the editor, it always referred to the owners as they or them, people that were at some distant, unknown quantity. Well, the truth of the matter is that there was hardly a time in the history of this mill when it really wasn't owned by people right here in town. It just wasn't well known or well publicized. But for example, one of the first investors after the original was a man named Ashbel Pepper from New Braintree. He was married to Catherine Woods. Catherine Woods' sister, Carolyn, was married to Seth Caldwell. Seth Caldwell was the agent for this company. Carolyn and Catherine were sisters to Harding P. Woods, daughters of Captain James Woods. And so you see right there we have three of the prominent families in town were involved. And Harding Woods was married to Sally Caldwell. So the Caldwells and the Woods were definitely involved in financing this powder mill. And so part of the money that we have was donated back to the town in subsequent years, probably was earned by this powder mill. And this powder mill earned money. During the Civil War, 1,600 kegs of gunpowder a day. 1,600 kegs a day they turned out at this powder mill, which means it was one of the major suppliers of gunpowder for the Civil War. And generally forgotten, even then they liked to forget it. And when it closed, everybody was very happy. What happened to this mill was, little by little the ownership changed. Addison Fay, Potter, Silly, Tolman were the names in the company name. Addison G. Fay, I don't think he ever lived here in Barre. He lived in Acton. Acton had a gunpowder works. This became the Massachusetts Powder Company, and then when it combined with Acton, it became the American Powder Company. And after the Civil War, the company decided, since there was a railroad that came very close to the powder works there, it was much more economical to produce gunpowder in Acton than it was in Barre, and so this closed down. Within just a very few years, of course, just a couple of years after they closed this place, the railroad came right over there. It was very close and would have been an easy haul, but by then it was closed. The people in town at the time, did not moan too much about the place closing. They weren't terribly upset. They just never did like having the powder mill. And as you can see, there's some magnificent stones in this old foundation. Little by little, the stones are disappearing, by the way. I don't know what happens to them.
Pretty good sized ones in there.
Yeah. You got to remember, these were probably set here in 1830. Well, the digging of all these canals